Nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows my sorrow. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Glory, hallelujah. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh, yes, Lord. Sometimes I'm almost to the ground. Oh, yes, Lord.
Welcome to Clinton Church Restoration's online community read of The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. The mission of the Clinton Church Restoration is to create an African American heritage site and cultural center at the historic Clinton A.M.E. Zion Church in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, where W.E.B. Du Bois was born and raised. As a cultural hub inspired by Du Bois's work as a seminal writer, scholar, and activist, this new center will use interpretive exhibits and contemporary programming to explore his complex life and legacy, celebrate the work of this Freedom Church, and share hidden and untold stories of African American life in rural New England. Our 14-week community read of The Souls of Black Folk will be moderated by Dr. Francis Jones-Sneed, historian, board member, and chair of our Scholars Council. Each week she will be joined by a guest scholar for a presentation of a single chapter of Du Bois's classic text, followed by a discussion with the audience. If you are joining us live, we invite and appreciate your participation. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box. For best results, we recommend you have the most recent version of the Zoom app downloaded on your device. Attendees watching via a browser may not have all the interactive features available. To see the full schedule for this community read or to learn more about the project, please visit our website at theclintonchurchrestoration.org. Thanks for joining us.
Still nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows my sorrow. Nobody knows the trouble I see. Glory, hallelujah.
Good evening and welcome to our first session of the community reading of W.E.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk. We are pleased to have with us this evening two guest scholars who will discuss chapter 1 of the book, followed by questions from the audience. Dr. Rashida K. Braggs is Associate Professor in Africana Studies and Faculty Affiliate in American Studies and Comparative Literature at Williams College. And Dr. MaryNell Morgan Brown is a Professor Emeritus of Political Science at SUNY Empire State College and an inspirational singer of traditional spirituals. Dr. Morgan Brown will begin with her comments about the chapter, followed by Dr. Briggs, and then we will open it up for questions from our participants. Please feel free to put your questions at any time in the Q&A box that's located at the bottom of your screen. Thank you. Dr. Morgan Brown?
First, thank you, Dr. Francis Jones-Sneed and the Board of Directors of the Clinton Church Restoration for inviting me to be one of the scholars for the community read of The Souls of Black Folk. To the community of readers, I say read the book in its entirety, from the forethought to the afterthought. The forethought is a one-page abstract or summary of the book. Dr. Du Bois tells the reader briefly what each of the 14 chapters is about. He asks the gentle reader, that is, primarily the educated white American, to read with patience so that you might come to understand the strange meaning of being Black at the dawn of the 20th century. For the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. As many know, this is an often quoted phrase, and it appears more than once in this book. One question we might ask today is whether this is also the problem of the 21st century. Still looking at the forethought, in it, Du Bois states what he tried to show in each chapter. He notes that some, in fact, all but 5 of the chapters have been published before, but they have been altered for inclusion in this book. As a final note in the forethought, he introduces the concept of the veil by asking whether he needs to identify himself as one of the Black folk. In chapter 1, titled Of Our Spiritual Striving, and chapter 2 of The Dawning of Freedom, Du Bois is trying to show what emancipation meant and what was the aftermath of emancipation. Notice how Du Bois uses his experiences as representative of Black folks' experiences. Then he sketches a history of slavery, the hopefulness of emancipation, followed by the disappointments of emancipation, and then reflections and looking forward. The Crying of Waters by English poet Arthur William Symonds and Nobody Knows the Trouble I See serve as the epigraph for chapter 1. In the poem, the never-ending crying for rest from the turbulent ocean tides represents the perpetual strivings of Black folk in the world, and especially in the US. Nobody Knows the Trouble I See captures the life experiences of Black folk from enslavement to emancipation and beyond, right up to today. Some key concepts and questions and issues demand our attention. How does it feel to be a problem? One might choose to deal with that question as the occasion may require, or simply choose to answer seldom a word. What do you see when the color line is used to separate people, the veil? How does one participate as a co-worker in the kingdom of culture when the desired prizes are labeled for whites only? What one might be tempted to do is to hold in common contempt all those on beyond the veil, on either side of it, or sink into despair because one has to live as an outcast, imprisoned in one's own house. How many souls? How many souls is Du Bois referring to? 2 souls, the double consciousness, 2 warring ideals in one Black body, striving to merge into a single true self that embraces her African American self and her American self. She would not Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world in Africa. She would not bleach her Negro soul in a flood of white Americanism, for she knows that Negro blood has a message for the world. She simply wishes to make it possible for people to be both Negro and American, without being cursed and spat upon by their fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in their faces. The strivers in all professions are hindered by prejudices despite the promises of emancipation. Few people worshiped freedom with half the unquestioning faith as did the American Negro for 2 centuries. Freedom came with a wild carnival of blood and passion and was welcomed with, "Shout, O children, shout you're free, for God has bought your liberty." Yet 40 years later, when this chapter was written, freedom is still elusive. The Holocaust of war, the terrors of the KKK, the lies of the carpetbaggers, the disorganization of industry, the contradictory advice of friends and foes left the bewildered serf still crying out for freedom. The 15th Amendment to the Constitution led to Black men voting themselves into the kingdom until the Compromise of 1876 began to steadily erode that political power. Away with the Black man's ballot by force or fraud, and behold the suicide of a race. Book learning replaced the ballot as the tool expected to end ignorance and poverty. To be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in a land of dollars is the very bottom of hardships. Never mind that the poverty is due to more than 200 years of forced, unpaid work. On top of this, add the destruction of the Black family and witness the failure of physical freedom, political power, and training of brains and training of hands. These were all tried in turn, successively. To be successful, they must be melded into one and tried simultaneously. These are denied because the world does not know and does not want to know the gifts and powers of the Negro. Will America be poorer if she replaced her brutal blundering with lighthearted but determined Negro humility, or her coarse and cruel wit with loving, jovial good humor, or her vulgar music with the soul of the sorrow songs? American fairy tales and folklore are Indian and African, and all in all, Black folks seem to be the sole oasis of simple faith and reverence in a dusty desert of dollars and smartness. At the end of chapter 1, Du Bois underscores its role as a narrative outline of the entire book by saying the following, quote, "And now what I have briefly sketched in large outline, let me on coming pages tell again in many ways, with loving emphasis and deeper detail, that men, and I will add, and women, may listen," and the word listen is important, "to the striving in the souls of Black folk," unquote. Many times throughout the book, without regard to race, listen to spiritual strivings, struggles, storming, and stress in the souls of Black folk. So read and experience this book with your senses, hear, see, feel, and in so doing, cast off any idea of race or color prejudice and discrimination. That's what Du Bois is asking of his readers of this book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morgan Brown. My name again is Rashida K. Braggs, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. Thank you so much to the Clinton Church Restoration and to Dr. Francis Jones-Sneed's leadership in organizing this. And it's a wonderful honor to be in community, in communion, in fact, with Dr. Morgan Brown. And I say the word communion because I think that this is a moment of communing together in this space on reflection on a very impactful text via spirituals, via song. As Dr. Morgan Brown and I have talked about in the past, this text is not only a written text, it is a text that sings. It is a collection of spirituals. You see that in the last chapter, and literally, but there are other ways that this text performs. And so I'm happy to be communing with you with this particular text because its power, its wisdom, far exceeds the century ago plus, that it was first written, and is very relevant and pressingly needed in our times right now. So I'm an associate professor of Africana Studies at Williams College, but I'm also trained in performance studies. And that means that as a performance studies scholar, I believe that performance is a site of intellectual inquiry. It's a site of research, so using performance as a way to research things. And also I believe that performance is a space of community engagement. And I see the ways that right now, the way that we're using the souls of Black folk, that it meets those three kind of sides, those three aspects of performance. So I'd like to talk to you today about how you might read the souls of Black folk as a performative text, a performance text. First, it brings together music, theater, and literature, and cultural performance. And I'm going to talk specifically about theatrical performance and also musical performance. So with theatrical performance, we might think of W.E.B. Du Bois as both an actor and a character on a global stage. So first off, in the forethought, Du Bois starts off by telling us, quote, "Need I add that I who speak here am bone of the bone and flesh of the flesh of them that live within the veil," end quote. In that way, he tells us that he's not just writing from his own perspective, but he's writing for a larger community. He's representing the one and the many. So he starts off as representing more than himself, taking on a role representing, symbolizing more than himself. And then he also widens the cast of characters which we normally associate with African Americans. So the habit would be to think of an African American as a problem, someone different, someone to be set aside, someone inferior, as opposed to someone who is relational to the American mainstream as well as the European mainstream. With the first epigraph, Du Bois creates a larger relationship, a larger cast of characters beyond just the African American. This color line problem is a line, right, that separates whites from Blacks, Americans from Europeans. So with that epigraph, he actually talks about relationship by taking a poem from a British poet and putting it in relationship with an African American spiritual song. He speaks to the power dynamics and the inequities between the US and British rule, and also the US and African Americans. So showing that there's this kind of repeated cycle of inequity, and the African American is at the heart of it. Du Bois also acts as both an actor and a character. And so we can see this very well when we think about the concept of the veil. So think of the veil as like a stage curtain. Think of the world as a stage. The Shakespearean quote, all the world is a stage which we play on, right? So think of the world as a stage, and think of Du Bois and other Black folk as performing on that stage, and the veil separating them from their performed selves and how others would read their bodies on that stage. Quote, "Born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world, a world which yields him no true self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world," end quote. Quote, "Shut out from their world by a vast veil," end quote. In this way, we can think of the veil as this stage curtain. And as a Black person being on the stage, the bright light shining on you, you are always performing, but people don't see the background. They don't see the backstage. They don't see the darkness, the labor, the humanity that's behind that performing self. And if we think of the veil as well as creating this type of double consciousness, the second sight, this experience of being Black is one of being the actor, knowing that you're an actor and have self-consciousness, but also knowing that you always have to be the character as well. You are both the actor and the character. And you have to switch between both. You have to have this second sight, which is not an experience that white Americans have had to have at that point. They don't have to have this kind of double consciousness of themselves as both actor and character. So that's might be helpful to think about the ways that this text shows the world as a stage and we all as actors, but the Black American as having to be both actor and character and able to switch, at the turn of very quickly. Another important kind of lens through which we might see this text is as a song. So I mentioned that it could be perceived as a collection of spirituals. I think that the choice of the song as an extended metaphor for this book is not done lightly. It's very purposeful by W.E.B. Du Bois. Because music is a universal language. We all listen to it. We all relay our emotions through it. We identify with people through it. And Du Bois brilliantly alludes to this art form that connects us all in some way. Music connects us all. And he also uses this text to uplift and rebrand the spirituals. So at this time, the spirituals are thought of as like this kind of raw, untutored, primal music that's made by inferior people. Instead, with this book, W.E.B. Du Bois documents, the spirituals, notating it, putting Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, in the text, and putting it right alongside a European poem. So uplifting it by putting it in conversation with something which is held with very much high regard. This text uses music to connect with people, but also to, again, uplift the way that we think of African-American cultural production, and to bridge this gap between, oh, this is African-American and this is white American and white European, to put them in dialogue. So there's a way that he uses music to make connections. And you see that with the epigraphs. You see that he also uses this text to create song, to create performance. All of the many multiple references to cries in which the song, the text actually kind of comes alive. His mention of the Fifth Jubilee Singers in later chapters, you will read about that. He's also showing the ways that the spirituals are a way that African Americans shifted in terms of their cultural prominence. As spirituals went to travel outside of the United States through people, through groups like the Fifth Jubilee Singers, the cultural prominence was uplifted. And so again, this text is trying to merge not only these two kind of warring ideals of the quote unquote Negro and the American, but also written text and musical text, and a past coming from Africa and a present being in the United States. And so I would be remiss as a performance studies scholar if I didn't take this moment to actually make the text perform as well. So we've seen the ways that this text can be theatrical. We've seen the ways that it can be musical, but I also want to show you there's a way that you can use performance as a research mode to understand the text better, to feel it better, to listen better, listen to those spiritual strivings that he talks about at the end of this chapter. So Dr. Morgan Brown has agreed to perform the text with me, and we've chosen a particular passage that speaks to the two-ness, this double consciousness that African-American experience is all about. So we would like to perform a little bit of it for you. One ever feels her two-ness.
One ever feels her two-ness.
An American, a Negro.
An American, a Negro.
Two souls, two thoughts.
Two souls, two thoughts.
Two unreconciled strivings.
Two unreconciled strivings.
Two warring ideals.
Two warring ideals.
In one dark body.
In one dark body.
Whose dogged strength alone
whose dogged strength alone
keeps it from being torn asunder. asunder.
Keeps it from being torn asunder.
Thank you very much. And I'll pass it back to Dr. Jones-Sneed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morgan Brown and Dr. Braggs. Really, really, performance, it really, really meets. And so we're having comments beautiful and not realizing that one could look at the souls of Black folk quite in that way. So it's great. We have only one question from our participants. We hope we will have more. Please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I'll start by asking our scholars a couple of questions just to give you time to put your questions in there. I will ask the first question that's asked by Olivia Georgia. She says, is it possible that if white people put themselves in the roles of actor and character, we would be better understand the consequences of white position?
I'll start with that one. Thank you so much for the question. I think it's about awareness. With that question, you're getting at the importance of not only self-awareness, but the kind of impact that your body and your being makes in the world, and realizing you're not just kind of in this world by yourself, right? Like, we're a community. I started out talking about communion, right? And how we are all connected in some way. So the more that people of every background, racial background, can realize their impact on others, the better, right? Because we all have to kind of live in this same space. So when you recognize that what you do affects other people, I think that the greater awareness by white Americans, or not just white Americans, but white people as well, to have this kind of cognition that there are multiple ways of living, and also greater awareness of what black people have to go through, that we have to have at least a double consciousness, you know, it's multiple consciousnesses actually would be helpful.
Great, thank you. Wonderfully done, an anonymous attendee says. Do many of your students participate in performing souls? And I'm sure that this is to Dr. Braggs.
I've actually never tried having them sing the text. Dr. Morgan Brown and I kind of came up with that because we thought it would be a great way for you to feel and to listen to this text too. We do lots of performative exercises in my classes that do include spoken word performance, singing, theatrical performance, dance performance, but I haven't quite tried this yet, so maybe this has given me a new idea.
Yes, and I had told them when they did this, this is what we're gonna do for 2021, that we're gonna do a performative experience with souls, you know, because you guys have come up with this. This is great. Erica, I'm sorry. Dr. Morgan Brown?
Yes, I just wanted to add to that notion about performance is Du Bois used performance not just in his writing, but he was a founder of the Krigwa Players, which is the Crisis Guild of Writers and Artists. It was a short-lived theater group, but he recognized that theater was a way to help people understand that our humanity is common. And he always did it from the perspective of Black folks. He said that the Krigwa Players would do art that was by us, for us, and always making it through the lens of the African American experience.
So this was before FUBU then, right? This leads to another question. What was Du Bois's musical background?
Well, I'll try that one first. He had no formal training, but I understand that he did play the piano, and that when he was at Fisk, He was the manager for the Fisk Jubilee Singers. He sang, he had a beautiful baritone voice. However, when he went to Harvard, he was not accepted as a member of the Glee Club there. He did try to join. So his training was not formal. I think it was just his love of music. He loved the classics. He loved the German composers. So he was a lover of music. And he recognized, I think through his study in Germany, one of the things that he came to understand was that the folk song was the purest expression of art from any people. And the traditional spiritual is the folk song of African American people. And you will hear later that he always said that this was the only American music.
Yeah. One Zoom user asked, immediately after slavery, did African American people have a plan? Who wants to field that question first?
Well, African American people had been legally denied opportunities for education, but despite that, they had a way of taking care of themselves, of demonstrating their capability of running some of the plantations that they were on. That question seems to imply that African American people somehow had a national organization that could have an influence on public policy. But I will add to that, that when the vote was given the Black males, they did vote themselves into the legislatures of the various states that had been a part of the Confederacy. They did make changes in policy that were beneficial to all Americans. One in particular was the establishment of free public schooling for all people. Black people had to covertly organize themselves and make their plans for survival during enslavement. Mm-hmm. And the chaos that was visited upon them, on Black folks after emancipation, and the abrupt end to it because too much progress was being made by African Americans, and the Compromise of 1877 that put Rutherford B. Hayes in the presidency and then took away the troops from the South that were providing some kind of protection for the newly freed people. Well, maybe I should just say, read The New Jim Crow and understand how the efforts that Black folks were making as a group were thwarted by the larger society.
And we would point to Du Bois's historical tome, Black Reconstruction, that we'll get a little look at in chapter 2 when he talks about what Black people did after the Civil War. What did they use Reconstruction for? Usually in historical texts, in US historical texts, when we come to Reconstruction, we always think that the Reconstruction was a failure. I mean, that's usually what's taught. Du Bois did not believe that. And so he, especially we're gonna look at chapter 2, he tells how Reconstruction was very beneficial for African Americans. And then he later wrote almost a 700-page tome on Black Reconstruction, you know, actually answering that question. And then Miss Shell Alexander piggybacks on that in The New Jim Crow, saying how far have we come from the time that Du Bois writes this Black Reconstruction to this contemporary time. Do you think we can make the case that this is one of the earliest examples, so it's Black folk, of intersectionality in scholarship?
Are you
I think
asking?
this is interesting. Dr. Morgan Brown and I were talking about gender a little bit, and perhaps she can kind of add more to this in terms of references to kind of collapsing the assumption to Black manhood, when we talk about like race, the ways that Du Bois does that. And I certainly think he speaks to race and class in intersectional ways. But Dr. Morgan Brown, did you have more to say about race and gender, especially as intersected in the work of Du Bois?
Well, Du Bois used the language of his day, which was gender biased, but he, in his actions, always intended to include men and women. Although The Souls of Black Folk is published in 1903, in 1905, he made it very clear in a brief essay for the Christian Register, actually published, I think, in October of 1905, poses the question, who are men anyway? They're not just our sons and fathers. They're also our mothers and our sisters and our daughters. And to me, this is his indication that when I use the term men, I really do mean to be inclusive. The chapter that's titled of the education of men, I'm not getting it quite right, the full title, but the statistics that he presents is a collection of the progress being made by men as well as by women in education. He actually surveyed all of the college-educated Black men and women at the time.
It's of the training of Black men. Is that the chapter that you're?
Of the training of Black men.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
One of your students, Oliver Joseph, Dr. Braggs, is on, one of the participants, and he says, hi, wonderful performance. And how do you think the ways in which the actor-character dynamic navigated by Black people changes or is complicated as Black people gain privilege in certain spaces, advanced degrees, income, and how to make that impact politic?
Hi, OJ. I'm glad to be in your presence, and I hope we can connect again soon. I want to hear how life is for you. So thank you so much for the question. He was a great student and one of my thesis students as well at Williams College. So great to be in community with you. In terms of your question, there's a lot of, how shall I say it, responsibility with being a Black celebrity. So I just watched the NBA finals and the Lakers win, a day or two ago. And I think of LeBron James as this celebrity figure who uses his mantle as one of the greatest basketball players of all time to promote change. It's thanks to him and others like him that we have Black Lives Matter on the basketball courts, on the jerseys, that there are strikes, there are all these different types of things. And so that's a way that he uses his own kind of strivings as a Black man. He uses that to fuel his role on the court as a basketball player. But those choices aren't made lightly, because sometimes, as OJ knows, as we all know, if you're not on the right side of like the trend, sometimes that is a big sacrifice. So you think of the Olympics in the late 1960s with John Carlos Williams and all of the others who, you know, did the Black Power fist before it was like cool and Black Power fist, and had threats against their lives, you know, lost their awards, lost recognition, lost funding, all of those different things because of the sacrifice that they made, the choice that they made. So I would say that it's weighty. It's great to be in that position to use your celebrity for political movement towards more political equality. But at the same time, I think you have to be even savvier in your double consciousness to know when, like, how to best use it and when to use it. Thanks again for the question.
Okay. Anonymous asked, what did he mean, Du Bois, by calling himself a problem as is seen in the eyes of white people? I think Dr. Morgan Brown will pitch that question to you.
What did Du Bois mean
by calling himself a problem as seen in the eyes of white people?
I think he's making the point that that is how Black folks are perceived in America and beyond, actually. But it is a manifestation of having to view yourself through the eyes or the lens of the observer. So how does it feel to be a problem comes to him not out of his own consciousness, but recognizing that that is what he is perceived as, and therefore needing to address that. His position as a character is problematic. His success, his strivings, his desires to be a part of the larger society without being discriminated against because of the color of his skin. And it could very well be that Du Bois, because of where he grew up with not as many Black people in the community, his community of Black people was small. He didn't really discover the Black community until he went to Fisk University and he was surrounded by Black folks. His formative years had not made him as painfully aware of his color, except on the one occasion where he had a schoolmate who refused his visiting card. But it opened his eyes to the fact that others looked at him as something different, something less.
I think that we still deal with that whole identity problem in that whites still ask in contemporary society, what does it feel like being Black? I mean, they intimately want to know that, to answer that to that question. And so if it's still being asked in the 21st century, I think Du Bois starting that chapter with that question, it has always been about identity. Do we really have an identity? How does it feel to be a quote unquote problem in society? So thank you for that answer. What role did the burial of Friedman have after slavery? A Zoom user asked. Tune in to chapter 2. There's a discussion of chapter 2 where Du Bois talks about Friedman's, Bureau of Friedman. And so you will get your answer then, Zoom user. Your performance of the passage was like a call and response, but of an identical text. The rendering of each was quite different. Were you trying to convey some difference in your interpretation, or was it more musical balance?
I don't know if you want to go first, Dr. Morgan Brown. We could both kind of speak to this.
Yes, you could take that one. I I think that the call and response is it, it does not require identical repetition, and it is a an opportunity to broaden the statements that are being made. That's how I felt that my contribution to our call and response um, carried forth.
I was thinking of relation. So I talked about connection and relation through performance. And so I was hoping to, you know, respond. You basically like to call out, and I was looking for a response, and I was hoping to create a dialogue, basically. So trying to kind of affect what I was talking about, like in beforehand.
And the whole call and response is a traditional way in African American music, and especially in African American church music, isn't it? Where the singer will sing a line, and then the audience will repeat that line and even elongate that line. I don't know the musical easel, sometimes even elongate that line. And so it seems that the singer and the audience are in communion with each other when you do that kind of call and response kind of way. So I thought it was just really beautiful the way that you took the passage and did the call and response from that. We want more of that from you guys later on. But Bill Sheen asked, are there creative works by other artists based on souls, performances, music, plays, artwork, etc.? I only know of one, I think of one, but maybe you guys know others.
I didn't look, so I've not heard of anything, but I didn't take a look.
Yeah.
There are, I don't know that I can give full description, but Craig, whose last name I'm not able to.
Craig Harris.
Harris has done a musical interpretation of the Souls of Black Folk. I'm working right now with someone doing a trumpet interpretation of the lines of music from the 14 chapters, as well as other songs that are mentioned or presented in part throughout the text. The book sings. I don't think we can say that too many times. I think of the entire book as a spiritual. And Du Bois is, I think, very much intentional in making it a book to listen to. His hidden meanings are in the poetry and the songs that he is using as the epigraphs for these chapters.
Yes.
And it's also the thread. It's the thread that holds the book together. Because
yes.
One of the concerns he had about the book was that this is a collection of essays that 7 of which, or all but 5 of which, I have written before. So 9 of which had been published before in different format. He altered them, added the epigraphs, and wanted to find a way to thread them together. And the music was how he did that. And I, for one, believe that the music is also how the book is made so much more approachable by the layperson. The academics can make multitudes of commentaries and assignments based upon the souls of Black folk in a multidisciplinary fashion. Yet for our lay people to really resonate with this book, the songs need to be brought forward.
Thank you. Karen Stevens asked, thinking about performance, what do you think is the significance of Du Bois saying, quote, I answer seldom a word, unquote, to the implied question, quote, how does it feel to be a problem, unquote? That is, what might be the effect of leaving a beat or a silence as an answer?
Wow, I really like that question and the thought behind it. There is so much richness, like in that space, like at the end of a line before you come to the next one. And it was interesting when Dr. Morgan Brown and I were singing, I was wanting to kind of fill that gap, but because of technology, you don't know how it is. But I mean, when I think of call and response, it's like kind of back and forth, and you can kind of feel that. But there's so much power in that space. Like, I think in not answering it, he forces the listener to find that answer like in other ways. There's no easy answer to this. He forces like the listener to be active and to engage and to be more like cognizant themselves. And so I think that that's the power of making other people act instead of solving the problem for them. But that's just my take. Yeah.
Beautiful. Dr. Morgan Brown, do you want to say?
I like that take. Du Bois, in saying, I answer seldom a word, even though I know the question is there, and the other person, the white person, knows the question is there, but by being silent, you do indeed force them to answer it themselves, or at least try to answer it themselves.
Well, we know that Dr. Du Bois did not take fools, lightly.
He did not suffer fools.
He did not suffer fools. And so he could have been also saying, that's not a question that, you have to kind of rethink that question. It's not a question that I have any business answering at this point, because I don't think he thought of himself or as Blacks as a problem. The problem indeed was within white America, not within Black America. So, have you considered any connection between the veil and the literal and figurative mask that we are wearing in 2020? As you both spoke, I could not help but think that about the two-ness of the contemporary mask. We are certainly in need of sorrow songs to make sense of this meaningless suffering. Thank you for your presentation. So I think that was more of a comment than anything else. Certainly, I think of it as well. It was Paul Laurence Dunbar, We Wear the Mask, which has become, quite famous, that just takes on the same context of what Du Bois is kind of talking about, Our friend and colleague, Nadine Weatherburn, who is going to be one of our guest scholars later on, she says, how does Du Bois help us to better understand the role of African Americans in military roles during the Civil War? How can we use his work to combat false historiographies, such as the quote unquote lost cause narrative?
Wow. Well, hello, Nadine. I'm so happy to know that you're out there listening. And this question is a really big one. I think that Du Bois would have us understand that Black folks are American to the core. The whole argument that he's making about Black folks, few people having a more fervent desire for freedom and a more intense belief in the founding documents and the founding phrases of this country, and have fought, in all of its struggles for its liberation from its colonizer, for the end of enslavement of Black folks in this country. And there's no instance where this country was involved in conflict when Black folks have not been there fighting to preserve our republic. He said of himself that if not for color prejudice, he might have been a worshiper at the shrine of this society into which he was born. So, and Black folks being portrayed as inferior, I refer to this whole notion of inferiority as a false ideology of white superiority. And Du Bois is a representative of that in many aspects of his own personal life, of his contribution, and his unwavering commitment to the values and the contributions of Black folk to America.
Yes.
I think that,
oh, I'm sorry, MaryNell.
That's okay. I was just going to add just the notion of the disproportionate impoverishment or poverty of Black folks. When folks talk about that, I would just make the appeal that you think about what any group of people might experience in terms of their material well-being if for 200 years they were not compensated for their work, and up to this day they are disproportionately compensated for work.
Yes, that question came from Nicholas Silverman and not from Nadine, and I certainly don't want to, Nadine has a question here and we want to talk about that question. And I think the whole kind of thing about the lost cause in the Civil War will be answered even more in depth when we look at chapter 2, because Du Bois actually speaks to that then. But we have about 1 minute to look at Nadine's beautiful question. She says, I love how, quote unquote, the body is brought to the fore with the beginning of this discussion of souls. Would the scholars please say more about the importance of this juxtaposition in helping a wider audience understand the strivings of Black folk in the US? Maybe that's a question we can leave with you to think about, because we're coming up for a promotional break at this point, that we will now pause for a short video from the Clinton church restoration and the president, Mr. Ray Gunn. We'll be back for more questions after the film. Thank you.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea.
Hello, I'm Ray Gunn, chairman of the Clinton Church Restoration Project. We are creating a nonprofit center for African American history and culture at the historic Clinton A.M.E Zion Church in Great Barrington, which I attended for over 70 years. The Berkshires are rich with Black history that is little known and sometimes misunderstood. For example, my ancestor, Agrippa Hull, served in the Revolutionary War and was the largest Black landowner in Stockbridge. Once completed, our center will tell his story and those of W.E.B. Du Bois, Reverend Esther Dozier, and many more. Please help by donating to this historic project. We need your support. Thank you.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, there's no hiding place down there. Oh, there's no hiding place down there. See, I went to the rock to hide my face. Rock cried out, no hiding place, no hiding place down there. Gonna pitch tent on the old cramped ground. Pitch my tent on the old campground. Gonna pitch my tent on the old campground. Give that devil another round. No hiding place down there. See, there's no hiding place down there. Oh, there's no hiding place down there. See, went to the rock to hide my face. Rock cried out, no hiding place, no hiding place down there. No hiding place down there. Oh, there's no hiding place down there.
Welcome back. And maybe we can now go to that question from Nadine Wedderburn. Do you need me to repeat it?
Sure, that would be helpful, thanks.
She says, I love, quote, the body, quote unquote, the body is brought to the fore with the beginning of this discussion of souls. Would the scholars please say more about the importance of this juxtaposition in helping a wider audience understand the strivings of Black folk in the US?
I'll start with that one. Even though the text starts with the spiritual thrivings and the forethought ends talking about the haunting melody of Black and American music, this is very much about the experience, the lived experience of having and living in a Black body in the United States. And Du Bois doesn't let us get away from that. I think in paying attention to the spirit, he shows emphasis on the humanity, you know, that sometimes African Americans are perceived as not human, not having emotion and feelings and aspirations just like anyone else. So he gets that on the table, but without leaving attention to showing the physicality of the Black body, that it's human, that it's not an object, that it's not an animal, but that it's human. And so I think having attention to both the spiritual, you know, mentality, the humanity of the Black man, as well as the body of the Black man, having both is important to change the perceptions of Black Americans at this particular time.
Dr. Morgan Brown, did you have a response?
Yeah, I think that Dr. Braggs has actually captured the essence of what is a perfect answer to that. Du Bois, it's an interesting actually that he is focusing upon the spiritual strivings, but he brings us back to the notion in one dark body. We are, our essence, our humanity is denied by the larger society. However, that is what we need to reckon with on a larger scale in our community, in the community writ large.
I agree. Mary Bergman asked, how does Du Bois reconcile his struggle with the double consciousness and warring ideals with his call for conformity to the greater ideals of the American Republic?
I'm silent because I'm not sure that I agree with the conclusion of the question, that is that he is calling for conformity to the American Republic.
To the greater ideals of the American Republic.
The greater ideals of the American Republic.
Mm-hmm.
I need to think on that one a bit.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about World War I, in his Closed Ranks essay, when he encouraged African Americans to enlist in the military, that he felt that maybe this was a time that we could go for the greater ideals of the American Republic and democracy by enlisting in the military. But of course, it didn't work. White Americans still did not respect African Americans anymore. In fact, the incidents of lynchings were really, really high. And when Black soldiers came back, they came back to even some of them were lynched wearing their uniforms. And so Du Bois had to rewrite his opinion of that whole thing. And I think that that's what pushed him into the kind of peace movement that he later went into in the 1950s, being much more for peace than for war. So he did try it, and he did encourage African Americans to embrace it. But then he looked at it and did a critique of it and said, no, it's not going to work in that kind of way. So, Dr. Braggs, any comments?
No, I have nothing to add on that one.
Okay. How does contemporary social media culture interact the experience of multiple consciousness?
That's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say it makes it more complicated. Already there are several layers of like being and performing, and social media just adds like one other layer.
Well, I think so. You know, the thing that came to my mind really quickly was Black Twitter. You know, that, you know, here African Americans have taken a platform, Twitter, and then they have usurped that to comment upon Black culture. That, you know, when something goes on about Black culture, they come to Twitter and say whether they agree or disagree with that. And it's become quite a thing. And I think that social media has, in fact, enlarged consciousness for many people, not just intellectuals, but others, to be able to speak to a number of things. So,
if I could just add something onto that, actually, Dr. Morgan Brown, when you were talking about W.E.B. Du Bois as the first kind of FUBUer, you know, for us, by us, it made me think of Criteria of Negro Art, the text that he wrote, and how it was kind of like a kind of a list of like, this is what you should do because Black art should be propaganda, like it needs to speak for, you know, like the equity of Black people, right? And so when I think about Black Twitter, I think that about like Black Twitter's fierceness, you know, it is very much a gatekeeper, you know, it has a lot to do with like issues of authenticity and politics of respectability and things like that. And I kind of see it as working in that mold of, you know, what is Blackness, what is Black, who are Black people aspiring to be, or what is Black culture aspiring to be. It's very much a kind of a gatekeeper of that. And in a similar way, I think, as to how W.E.B. Du Bois made himself a gatekeeper in terms of, you know, with the crisis and also with the text that I just mentioned as to like, what should Black art be? What should it do?
I like that.
Yes. And I like that answer very much. And Du Bois always pronounced the word propaganda. It did not have in his mind the negative connotation of it's just an aggregation of lies to tell about something. For him, it was presenting the best self of a people rather than always looking at the negative side of who people are. All people have a continuum that goes from the not so desirable to the highly desirable. And Black folks are no different. And however, when you look at how we are portrayed, we are always the lesser than. So when he went to Paris and did that photographic exposition that he won a prize for to show that we were not people who were languishing in primitive times, that we were people who were founders of civilization and had thrived in Africa, and all of that had been stripped from us. However, or not all of it, an attempt had been made to strip that from us, but that attempt had not been successful. And his project was to show, even at the turn of the century, merely 2 generations out of the most peculiar system of enslavement the world had ever witnessed, here are people who are not broken. Discouragement is an unwritten word, he wrote in this first chapter. There's never give up and never denigrate yourself. Always put the propaganda forward, because that's what art does for us, and it does that for any people.
Very good. We only have 1 minute left, and I will read this question because I really like this question, but I'm not sure how long we would have to answer it. How do Black people unburden ourselves from the weight of double consciousness? How does Du Bois suggest we avert or ignore the white gaze?
Yeah, in that first chapter on the second page, he talks about being successful. And I think that's one way he tries to avert it, but it's also still in the frame of like, what is white success? What is American success? But later on at the end of that second page, he writes, these powers of body and mind have in the past been strangely wasted, dispersed, or forgotten. And that makes me think about this text in the way that it was like one of the first like Black is beautiful texts. Black is, you know, like, we're proud of this. You know, you may have like denigrated like who we are, but we're going to kind of lean into this. And so I think one of the ways to avert or ignore the white gaze is to lean into the beauty of Blackness, right? And all of the stuff that doesn't need to be legible, you know, to be like beautiful. So earlier there was a question about the silence and the pause at the end of a line. In that is so much kind of rich knowledge that isn't necessarily legible, that may be legible to people who have, you know, Black experience, right? And so that's okay for that, like kind of underground like knowledge, and also this kind of recognition of Black beauty to kind of exist in its own way, separate from other like knowledges and perspectives.
Thank you so much, Dr. Braggs and Dr. Morgan Brown, for coming here and being with us this evening for the discussion of Chapter 1. This has been so rich. And so we look forward to talking to you two again, to continuing, I think, the beginning of a project one way or the other. We thank you who have participated with us in this inaugural chapter 1 of the Souls of Black Folks. And we hope that you'll come back next week when we will discuss chapter 2, entitled Of the Dawn of Freedom, with our guest, Dr. Barbara Krackheimer from UMass Amherst. Good evening.